That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hello and welcome to the intersection of faith and fear, where we discuss each week what scares us in order to find what saves us. This is the Fear of God podcast. It is time once more, friends and foggers, to assemble the ka-tet, those for whom time is but a face on the water. Thank you, Sai. That's right. It is time for another quarterly king. Episodes every 25 episodes or so, meant to celebrate our own Roland Deschain, Uncle Stevie himself, Stephen King. I am one of your hosts on this monorail ride, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And you guys, Reed, he showed up to the recording a few minutes ago and he said, "Give me what I want and I'll go away," which is just a real puzzling bit of something for Riri. And now he's just sitting there staring at me. He has been for a few minutes. So I assembled some of the residents of Little Tall to determine what to do with Reed's strange behavior. So please welcome back to the show, Andy Whitfield and Blake Collier. Welcome, fellows. Welcome. Bit of a perilous scenario you're walking through. That was lovely.
That was lovely.
Hey, random question, boys.
Mm-hmm.
Have either of you seen Ted Lasso?
Yes.
I have seen the first 3 episodes.
Oh, what a wonderful show. We'll talk about it. Blake, just feel free to pepper in, and you too, Andy, for what you have seen. It's fun time. So good. I'm glad to hear it. So Andy and Blake, y'all discuss amongst yourselves what to do about Reed. In the meantime, I want to let the listeners know that you can find the Fear of God podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and that your official source for all things foggy is our website, thefearofgodpodcast.com. And also, wait, it looks like Reed is coming too and wants to say something. Reed, are you doing okay, buddy?
Born in lust, turn to dust. Ooh. Born in sin, come on in.
No, thank you. Riri, you're here.
I love how I always get cast as the villain in these things.
No.
There was that one time I was
careful.
Beverly. Yeah,
I'm not casting you as the villain. I'm casting you as a central character because you are a central character to the story of the Fear of God. Now,
that
in
makes me feel a lot
cases, because we cover horror themed material, that central character happens to be a villain or Beverly Marsh.
So we are sans one member of our ka-tet, but it is so delightful to see Blake and Andy back with us. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, Ian was going to be here, but he got taken out in the storm.
Yeah, we were out there watching the snowfall, and suddenly
Gone.
it's like, where's Ian? He's just we don't see him. Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
I think he took it off his own head with an axe or something.
Wow.
No.
Wow.
Come on. You remember the lighthouse was falling.
Yeah.
And we started looking around and it was so amazing.
Andy brought receipts.
The man's got
got 'em.
receipts. Oh man. So I would like to just sort of start things off by thanking, first of all, my co-host, and then you both as well for indulging me in this. First of all, listeners who are keeping track, we do a new quarterly king about every 25 episodes or so. But wanted to do one a little early, and actually where it was really on my mind a lot. Some of you may remember this, maybe you don't. We all share a mutual text thread where we just sort of keep track with each other and check in on how our days are going, etc. And I remember like several months ago, back in probably November, December timeframe, I had said that I had been thinking a lot about Stephen King's Storm of the Century. That the story itself just really would not escape my imagination. And I know, Andy, you and I texted a little bit about that, like, outside of that thread, just like, oh yeah, what's up with that? I think I texted a little bit with Blake as well. But so then I was talking with Nathan, and we knew we had a quarterly king coming up, and we were debating, okay, what's it going to be this time? King's catalog is vast, and there's lots of landmarks in it. And I had this weird moment where I was like, oh my God, can we do Storm of the Century? Yes, there are other more known or more iconic works that we've not yet covered that might seem like they would be ahead of the line, but can we talk about Storm of the Century? And Nathan, as he frequently does, was like, I'll support my friend. What's going on? Like why do you want to talk about this? So I want to first of all ask.
That was a very generous way of phrasing the fact that I question every choice you make. Is the underlying.
Yes, which is true. But so we'll get into like specifics in a second. But I first of all want to find out, particularly from Blake and Andy, and then Nathan, maybe you can round out the corner. Is just I want to know from each of you, like, had you heard of this before? Had you seen it before? What was your history / intersection with this particular unique entry in King's canon? Andy, I'll start with you.
For some reason, I thought it was The Mist.
Interesting. Okay.
I know I know it has a different name, but from my thought process and what I thought everybody was going to be stuck in like a supermarket or something
Grocery
like
store.
that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and as I was watching the beginning of it, I don't know, it felt like I had watched this movie a little bit before, never the whole thing, but a little bit before.
Swing parts, sure.
But other than you saying let's watch Storm of the Century, and by the way, it's 4 hours long, I had not had very much contact with it without thinking it was The Mist.
Okay, understood. What about for you, Blake?
So strangely enough, the thing that struck me was actually the cover art, or the VHS, what would have been the VHS box, because I think that's probably where I came across it at some point.
Sure.
Parts of it, when I was watching, I was like, vaguely remember something like this from my past. So it's probably something my parents watched when it was on TV.
Sure.
And I probably caught some of it, but because only like it's mainly the parts when Linoja's in prison that struck a chord, like it made me remember it. But yeah, outside of that, I knew of the name, but I didn't really know much more than that. So
sure. No, understood. And Nathan, I know you had not seen it before, but any awareness of it in King's catalog or anything?
No, I didn't know the story, and honestly, I knew this wasn't this, but all I could think of was, what is the Clooney storm, like the ocean,
the perfect storm?
Oh, perfect storm.
That's all. Like Andy in The Mist, that's all I knew. That wasn't correct, but that's all I could come to. And in fact, when it proved to be a blizzard of a sort, I was like, oh, not the storm I was expecting. I do want to do a brief asterisk here and shout out one of the few remaining video stores, perhaps in the country, Visart Video here in Charlotte, perhaps Visart or Visart. I'll edit this and they will appreciate it one way or the other, hopefully. Reed sent out the means by which we could get this film, and one of which was like multiple YouTube links. I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not and Visart Video here in Charlotte has a deep library, exhaustive library. In fact, they're who I got the original Suspiria from back when we covered that.
Oh, wow.
And I just thought, you know what? I bet they're going to have this. So I called one day. I was like, hey, you got that George Clooney movie?
Mark Wahlberg was in it too.
Why, yes, we do.
He was. Yes. The great Marky Mark and his Funky Bunch. And fortunately, Visart did have Storm of the Century, so I rented it on DVD. It was a double-sided DVD, which are not in production anymore.
Double-sided. That's been a while since
it has.
Like,
I know.
The last Samurai was the last one I remember.
Wow.
Double-sided.
That's that one with Clooney, isn't it?
No,
he's in all of them. Clooney's in all of them.
Yes, cruising.
The deep fake.
You hit one of the major points of knowledge for Andy. He's like, DVD discs, man.
Yeah. Double-sided, Last Samurai. Anyway, so thank you to Visart. If you are in the Charlotte or nearby regions, you should patronize them. Offer them your patronage. Be a patron of them.
Give them your patronage.
So no, I was very unfamiliar to the point of not even knowing what kind of storm we were referencing here. And as a last little funny anecdote, before you take us into the blizzard read, I actually wrote down, let me find it here. For the king heads in the audience, I said, here I was thinking it might just be a town against nature story. Nope. Got to have a supernatural character in it. You know, I was like, oh, all right. Real human characters versus a force coming against them that is natural. Not the case.
No,
Not the case.
That
Not
was
the
how I
case.
felt about reading the 1,000-page tome Under the Dome. It's like, this is cool. All these character human dynamics. Nothing supernatural here. Oh, it's aliens. Okay, cool. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Sorry.
That
Thankfully, spoiling that about Under the Dome, there is so much more in that book that you get.
Oh, it's a fantastic book. And then
Yeah,
you're like, oh, okay.
No, that's cool. So so this piece is about 20 years old now. It aired on ABC in, I believe, 98 or 99, but I think it was 99. And
wow, that actually seems more recent than I thought.
Yeah,
And
that's what I was thinking too.
was this like a heyday of like King TV adaptations?
absolutely it was.
There was
Absolutely.
Because I remember The Shining. I don't know when it came out, but was this like,
Yeah, that was 97.
hey,
yeah.
let's
For the Langoliers.
Yeah,
96.
Yep. Mhm.
The
let's
Tommy
get
Knockers.
King on TV.
Yep.
No, it was absolutely right. So Andy, you brought up a really, really good point, because like the
Thank you.
Netflix has changed Netflix has changed the game in a lot of ways and made what they call, and I wouldn't solely cite Netflix as the progenitor of this, but like basically they've highlighted the success potential of limited series. It's longer than a movie, but it's not an ongoing series story. It's a finite amount of time. But before that, in TV history, like back in the late 70s, there was some TV miniseries. I think that one of the early ones was one called Rich Man, Poor Man, which I've never seen. There was one like called The Thornbirds, and Roots is one that most people like know about. And it became like this big sort of landmark event where it's like, hey, it's a finite story on TV. Everybody gather around and watch it, right? Well, then they kind of went too far with it. And I think in the mid or late 80s, there was one called War and Remembrance that was like almost 30 hours long. And it wasn't very good and just
Not a miniseries.
exhausted everybody. And so it was like these nightly, like
Everybody.
2-hour events. And so it kind of presented a potential death knell to the TV miniseries as a format. But then ABC specifically wanted to do it as a miniseries. And so they did the 2-night, and that was in 90. They did a 2-night It miniseries, huge rating success. So Andy, the point you just made of like the heyday of King miniseries, suddenly it became clear to them, we have struck gold in adapting King material for television. So they did like Langoliers, that's what Nathan mentioned. They did The Stand in 94, all of them big rating successes. They did a new adaptation of The Shining. Now, The Shining wasn't as popular as some of the previous ones. King has said in interviews that the reason he thinks that wasn't as popular is because it was something nobody in the audience was asking for. That even though he's not fond of Kubrick's Shining, most of the rest of the world is. And so The Shining was not something that people were really itching for. But which brings us to Storm of the Century is they were kind of looking for, okay, King, like what's next? Like we want to fund a new TV miniseries. And King said, you know what I'd really love to do is I'd really love to do something that's completely original. I'd love to not adapt one of my works, because he wanted to have this moment where people were watching it. And as he put it in the DVD commentary on Storm of the Century, as he put it there, he said, I wanted for people to not get the experience of somebody in the room who had read the book leaning over like, just wait till what happens to this guy, that everybody collectively is experiencing the story at the same time. And he wanted to see if he could do something truly, like kind of gut punching and really introduce some real horror to the story in a way that everybody would collectively experience together. And he said ABC, to their immense credit, he said they were like, yep, what do you want to do? Here's the budget we can give you. Go do it. Write your story. And so he had a hand in who directed this, which was Craig Baxley. He reached out specifically and sought him to direct the piece, had a hand in casting. all these kinds of things. And he has lots of interesting things. If any of our listeners watched this by a similar way that Nathan did by collecting a DVD, King's commentary is worth checking out. Helpful tip. He speaks mostly in the first hour and a half and the last 45 minutes. All of the middle is kind of Craig Baxley, and it's interesting stuff, but not as interesting as what King has to say, if I'm being honest.
Was this this was not directed by King, and the only film that King directed was the Max Overdrive?
Maximum
Is that
Overdrive.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which
Sorry,
proves to-
tangent.
No. It proved to everybody that King is not a very good director. He's a great writer,
Okay.
but he's not a very good
Not a
director.
good director.
But what's interesting is one more thing from me about why it felt urgent to, well, not urgent, but important to talk about this. Then we can maybe summarize the story and kind of just roll up our sleeves and get into it. Is King had recently, I think this article was maybe 2-3 years ago, as interview questions do when they get King in the mic, they said, like, what's your favorite of all your TV adaptations? Very specific. Tons of things have been adapted for movies. Tons of things have been adapted for TV. What's your favorite of your TV properties? And King pretty quickly said, Storm of the Century is my favorite thing we've done for TV. Both the experience of kind of getting to do something original, but also he cited it as one of the strongest just pieces of filmmaking that has been presented of his work on TV, in his opinion. And why it was so vital for me that we talk about it is and we're in the thick of it as we're recording it, but listeners have been around us enough. I'm here amongst my friends, so I'm just going to lay it all on the table. The story of Storm of the Century has been on my mind a lot because of the ways in which the global pandemic of 2020, and that we're still riding through in 2021, though as of this recording, things appear to be getting a bit easier and better with the production of the vaccine and everything. But the global pandemic and the way it sort of put everyone in this potboiler of ethical dilemmas, moral dilemmas, and then there are instances that you could point to where people were opportunistic and tried to sort of seize the moment to leverage people's fears to try to do certain things on their own behalf. And it probably would have been more, relevant maybe, when the pandemic was more at its height. But it is really, this story particularly has been on my mind so much, and the ways in which it wrestles with its moral dilemma made it something that I was just, not to put too fine a point on it, was very eager and passionate to talk about. So I just want to thank everybody for joining me on what is ostensibly going to be an 1.5 or 2 hour therapy session for Reed. So I really want to thank you, my friends, for watching this movie and showing up.
Isn't that every fear of God?
It is almost every fear of God.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true.
Nice.
So that having been said, I want to briefly summarize it and then just kind of open it up for us to have a bit of discussion. I'll probably pivot over to one of you to just sort of prompt some thoughts. So the story, as brief as we can make it, is, as has already been alluded to, there's a huge blizzard coming into the town of Little Tall Island, and the inhabitants are preparing for what is dubbed the Storm of the Century. And while they are sheltered in and sort of trying to lock down and protect themselves from this, a stranger has come into town. And the stranger, the moment he shows up, he murders one of the town's older inhabitants, a rather helpless old lady, brutally murders her, and then begins to pervasively sort of terrorize the town with this repeated question that Nathan called out at the beginning: give me what I want and I'll go away. And he holds back for a while exactly what it is he wants, until the town is kind of at prime terror and they're at sort of peak horror. And then what he says that he wants from them, because we're going to get into the subject now, might as well just go ahead and say, after a few hours of sort of just trying to stand up under this supernatural being's oppression, then he finally reveals, what I want, because I'm old and dying, I want a child. Give me one of your children, and to become my child, and I will raise them and I will make them like me. And if you do not give me one of your children, I'll destroy all of you, including your children with you. So give me one of your children freely, or I will destroy everything. And this obviously poses a tremendous moral dilemma for the town. That's the summary in brief of the 4-hour movie. It's definitely got a lot more going on in it than that. But I was concerned about the heaviness I was concerned about the dark nature of the story. So I kind of want to open the field a little bit and just get some general reactions to it. I've already gone over histories, so maybe as a way to kind of bridge the discussion, and I'll go in reverse of what I did before, Nathan. I'll start with you and just sort of your general thoughts, reactions, anything that stood out to you about the film once you saw it.
Yeah, I know. I can be pretty jokey sometimes, and so I'm sure those won't be absent this conversation. But, and having been a King fan for, you know, for me personally, 2 decades at this point, there was something impressive about the narrative. About the narrative, but about this delivery mechanism of this narrative. It does have, you know, production values of the late 90s for a TV show or TV, you know, budget, that sort of thing. So some of it you forgive and it is what it is, but the actual work of the piece really kind of did a number on me. I mean, it to call it heavy is a bit of an understatement. And the best King work, and I you know, I would say this might fit in that box. The best King work presents human decision making against supernatural dilemma. And whether or not the human decision making will rise to the occasion in a sort of this is a reductive phrase, but in a morally positive way.
Yeah.
And this 4 hours keeps ratcheting up. There's a couple of pieces of media I've been watching lately, one of which is this, that to say the act of watching it breaks my heart is not misspeaking or overspeaking. Like it has all the Kingisms, you know, silly mantra that the villain repeats over and over.
Sure, right.
Mystical being, you know, odd colloquialisms of its characters. But at the root of it is a very harrowing human engagement with what do we do in the face of a real ethical trial. And so anyway, I don't want to take away conversation partners' time or get into places we're not quite ready to go yet. But yes, I was very moved by the substance of the narrative in a way that I didn't, and maybe wasn't even quite prepared to experience.
Yeah, no, I understand. What about you, Blake? What was your general reaction to it?
So I'm gonna preface this by saying that I agree with what Nathan was saying as far as like the conceptualization of the story was really, really fascinating, and I think it was really well kind of put together. I hated this miniseries.
Oh, really?
Like,
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I felt so detached at every turn, and I think this goes to a lot of things about King for me, that I always think he has great ideas, but I don't trust his instincts. Like as far as what he does with those ideas, I think the actual, like, if you just kind of put down the plotting, the narrative down on paper, it's stunning. It's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And it's really harrowing. And I think it's just, I've seen a few other things that did something similar that were way better. And
interesting.
The final scene in the kind of the courthouse is the courthouse or the anyways. Yeah. It just reminds me of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, which is one of my favorite all-time short stories. And
sure,
it's just like, it's hard to beat that short story, and it's kind of that. So
yeah.
We covered The Lottery on the Fear of God. Stephen Beckley, you can reference that somewhere.
It's been a while. I need to go back and listen. But yeah, I don't know what it was. It may have just been the director. It may have been Maybe I don't like to say datedness because I think that films can be dated and I can still get complete joy out of watching them. But
Right.
something about the way this was constructed and put together, man, just kept me at a distance the whole time. I never could
Interesting.
invested in the characters.
Would you identify, Blake, are there favorite King works of yours? Or are you just a general kind of appreciator and nothing really overly speaks to you specifically?
I tend to like his I suppose I tend to like his smaller works. Like I was a big fan of Dead Zone, the book.
Sure.
And of course I like the movie too, but Carrie, Missouri, I like the smaller, like more contained.
Yes.
I think once it gets more epic, it gets
but I mean, I don't even know that I would your response was stronger than I would have articulated, but yeah. I think I responded to the emotional aspect of the piece, but like I said, there are Kingisms aplenty here that he tends to succumb to. What I think is a strength of this one is the format forces him to shed a lot of the fat that often is present. Now, which isn't totally fair to him. The adaptations of his work often miss the mark because he includes so much in the text that can't make it into the piece. Anyway, so now you're still in good company, Blake.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Now he said again, I'm going to try to limit my references to his commentary, but he calls out that the lottery was a direct sort of influence on that, and so he kind of knew what he was doing by cribbing from some of that format. I think one major difference that I did respond to much more positively that we didn't mention in the summary that is different from the lottery is the voice of Mike Anderson in this in that courtrum scene, because in the lottery,
a challenger to the system,
because in the lottery what you have, and Shirley Jackson's story is brilliant, she was a genius, but that story, you have a collective town that just sort of adopted this whole thing, and this is just what they do. What this presents that I do find immensely compelling is Mike Anderson staying up and saying, we can't do this, like, this is not something, this is not a bridge we can cross. And that is something that I think is missing from the lottery as a singular piece that King was able to introduce, I think, to great effect here. But it definitely, it is that combined with the stranger in the town who's come and disrupted everything. It's definitely.
Now that being said, I found the first half way more effective than the final half. I think the way that whatever they were doing in the first half, where we didn't know as much about Linoge, we were starting to get to an idea of what the townsfolk were like, but we were still kind of in a shroud of mystery.
Right.
I just felt like there was the reveals in the second half for me killed a lot of the characters for me.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, exactly. And so like, I think I stopped, like whatever, tie I had to each of the characters was kind of just, I was like,
yeah.
So
yeah. No. Definitely hear you. Andy, what was your experience of it? You watched all of it, we know.
We watched all of it. Didn't rate it. Man, I really enjoyed it for what it was. It didn't seem too supernatural for me. It seemed very plausible. I like the parallels between this and Roanoke. Is that it?
Yes.
Roanoke. How interesting that would have been if or maybe it was implied that he went to Roanoke and he caused that to happen. The courtroom scene, like you said, I liked, but I've never seen the lottery, so I don't know what y'all are talking about. Right. But I really enjoyed it. It's something about a movie or a piece of work where a character can look inside of someone and pull out their sin or pull out something that they're hiding. Like, I love a story like that. I love a story. Whether it be supernatural or something like that. I think the something recent that comes onto my mind is Training Day. It's just like, he pulled the Denzel Washington pulls Ethan Hawke out of this, what he thinks he's going to be, the straight edge cop, and he's not, and he makes him smoke PCP and all of that. But I love a story where the bad guy like can see inside of you. And bring out, and then like how awesome, and then I love it when like one of the good guy's biggest sin is I cheated on a test when I was in college.
I did love that. I was like,
the only thing you could find on the guy.
I actually cackled when it came to that part. I was like, really?
I'm like, we're already in Yuppie Town with Little Paul, the whitest island on the northeast coast, and then it's like, hey, buddy, the worst thing you ever did was cheat on that test in undergrad. Like, I gave this and got called out.
And so I like that. I like that. Like, that's what his sin was, and it gave him more power, I think, when it came down to are we allowed to go further with the lottery? Or we can't? Is that what we're calling that scene, the lottery?
We can shorthand it as the lottery scene. Because they draw stones to decide which child is going to be taken.
And so just him being against it and him fighting against it, like, all sin is weighted the same, and you look at it all the way, but like everybody can look at it and like, well, I beat the crap out of our, I don't want to make a joke about it. I get it. But like, I beat the crap out of a homosexual and gave him one eye. Or
that character, right?
Or I'm a priest whose nieces are scared of me because I'm a pedophile. But like Mike, as the one who is the voice of reason, saying, please don't take the kids, let's us all jump off the bridge. His sin is I cheated on a test. Like, all sin way the same, but like, and it reminds
the townspeople are like, wait a minute, take Mike. Take
Mike. But it reminds me of and I'm doing this in honor of Ian, in Age of Ultron, this conspiracy theory. Maybe it's not a conspiracy theory, it's just a thing in Age of Ultron where Captain America tries to lift Thor's hammer and he's unworthy. But after he tells Iron Man that Bucky killed his parents, he's able to wield it. Is there some kind of, would Mike have even been worthy enough to take on the place of this old guy? Why did it have to be one of those kids? Why couldn't it have been, I don't know. And I'm getting into it. You said we didn't have to stay in a box. So you said, why couldn't the kid who couldn't play basketball, why couldn't he have picked him? Or why couldn't it have been an adult? Or were these sent now? Old fat boy, the mean one. The one who was like monkey boy,
the bully.
The bully shouldn't have been included. He shouldn't have been included on the sinless children. But I don't know. It just, it just seems like Mike would have taken the place of all of that, and I wanted to see Mike do that.
Well, and because what you scratched at that is just igniting my imagination about this idea of somebody coming in and telling their sins is what it does is it hobbles their moral standing. So one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy in moral discussions is, and I'm going to go ahead and call it a lie, the lie that somebody's own sin restricts them from being able to call out what is right and good when they see evil encroaching upon them. That somehow, because I am sinful, I have sacrificed my ability or right to call out a thing and say that is not right. That somehow, because I am not perfect, there's this sort of hypocrisy policing that people tend to do where they say, well, you have no moral leg to stand on because you've done all these other things. And what I think is really fascinating about that dilemma at the end is I do think it's subtext, but I think that's part of why they are partially ready to just fold to Linoge, is because Mike is standing up here and saying, we need to bind together and tell him, no, we can't do this. But they've already been confronted. That's what Linoge was doing from the moment he was escorted through the general store. He was saying, you went and had,
Shame.
right over there, shame, you went and had an abortion. You beat up the gay guy in the next town and put out his eye. You did this. And that's what he's doing, is he's undermining their own ability to stand up and say, no, we are not going to do this evil, wicked, ruinous thing. And that still pervasively exists in discussions of moral ethics and everything, of saying like, and to the degree that suddenly people then begin to feel bolder about absolving these other sins as inconsequential because of all of the times that other people have gotten away with things. Well, you've done that, so I'm just going to go over here and do this. And that's how moral degradation happens as a collective society. It's not the only way, but it begins to erode that way. Go ahead.
Can I push that a little bit?
Sure.
A conversation recently had with a group of guys left me a little heated, but one of the arguments that they made is, how can I call out someone's sin if I have a plank in my own eye?
Sure.
And do we fall back onto that of saying it, and you laugh, and I'm not trying, are you laughing at my hair or are you laughing at the plank in our own eye, and how do we, is that what these guys are talking about? Is now everyone can see the planks in their eyes, so they feel like they don't have a plank to stand on. But just pushing back on that, I do agree. But then there's scripture that says you should call out your brothers and sisters where they're wrong and stuff. I think this is going to be if last year was, I learned anything, it's the year of pushing back on things for me. Pushing back and saying, this isn't right. This isn't, you're not right. This is not something that we should be doing. We should not be joking this way. We should not be saying this. We should, especially, a year ago we were, today is March 17th. Is that all right if I reveal that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Today is March 17th. And a year ago, we were talking about how to be anti-racist and the Black community. And then today, the big thing that came out today was the man who went in and shot
Atlanta.
8 Asian
Right.
people, and now it's turned into Asian anti-racism.
Right.
And so it's all racism. So let's not turn it into be this. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going on this tangent. Excuse me while I process.
You have
and
room.
speak at the
You have room. You're among friends.
But the racism is the same, but the calling out of it is the same, and we focus. I just don't want each year for it to be a no focus. A year ago it was African American. Probably the year before that it was immigrants coming into the United States with the wall and going out.
Right.
And now it's looking like this year is going to be, or not look like it's going to be, but it's going to turn into Asian American. And why can't we just look at this and say there is a problem where we as white people, where we as people in general are being douchebags and awful to people, and we are treating them like they are less than they should be, and that they don't matter that they should be. And some of our arguments are, we are better. They, whatever. I don't know the argument for the Asian, why we're better than Asians. Not that white people are better than Asians, but
we got you.
Right.
I don't know that argument. But
can I jump in, Andy?
Please do.
I think part of what you're identifying, and part of what is inherent in this text, is accountability and shame, and the extreme avoidance of both. Now, one of the reasons, and Blake, you identified not being a super fan of this piece, and that is totally understandable given some of, like I've said, the kingisms inherent to it. But one of the reasons I responded to it is I was so impressed with the moral arrow that it shot through with, from the standpoint of, however fantastical Linoge is, there's a very real dynamic at work in the text that plays itself out on an individual scale that morphs into a societal scale. And I think, Andy, what you're identifying is that why I responded was, oh my God, this is what we do. Something in the world, be it an individual we know, a stranger, our self-flagellation, the church that has conditioned and created this culture in us, we shame ourselves for these infractions. Now, I think the challenge comes in finding what that standard is. In other words, Andy, you brought up the Plank scripture, and there's extreme value to that, and we can't let it all just pass as well. You know what, that guy did that terrible thing to that person, but I'm a sinner too, so he's good. That woman did that terrible thing to that person, but I can't really say anything because I'm a sinner too. That is a bullshit lie from hell that needs to be named as such, because here's the thing: none of us want to be called out for our error and our misjudgment, and our no one wants to be held accountable for the times we've wronged ourselves or others. But there's a very real scenario where we live in a little tall in the real, meaning we've let each other all off the hook for the dumbest stuff. And that starts this avalanche, so that when the time comes that there's a Mike Anderson in the crowd saying, when shouted down is, how do we do this? And he says, we stand in one voice. Yes. We just say, well, we're not one voice, and we aren't. And that's a friggin' giant problem, because
Yeah.
we don't know how to exercise solidarity. And I think there's Andy, to answer sort of, or at least to address what it felt like the question behind your questions was there's compassion. There's compassion. There's accountability and compassion. There's saying priest character who entered the story literally at the midpoint, and the minute you see a guy in a clerical collar, you're like, he's no good.
No.
In a Stephen King work is what I mean.
Not in a King work.
yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. You know, he's no good. Turns out he's terrible. But the point isn't we let each other rest in our terribleness.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that is, to me, the power of this piece is, Rita, you know, I don't know where all you want to go, but
Let's go.
I
Yeah.
couldn't watch this movie and not think of our conversation of On Writing from a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whenever that was, because at some point in life, we're all going to be a Mike Anderson, and we're all going to be on the other side of it too.
Right.
We're going to be the person who says, no, man, I'm a terrible person, and I'm not accountable for any of these people around me, and I'm not even accountable for myself. So take the kid. We're going to be that person at some point in time. But the reverse is true too. The moment's going to come where a challenge is going to arise that's going to test the fiber of us to the core, where we have to be able to rally our peers, our fellows in faith, and I don't mean fellows in the gendered male sense, and just in the general solidarity of the peers sense, to be able to say, we got to stand against this thing. And you know, again, at one point in time, we're going to be each of those things. But why I reference On Writing is why that conversation was so meaningful to me in hindsight is just this notion of the holy imagination. Because what's powerful about the end of that story, of the end of Storm of the Century, is we don't know that Linoge, and in fact, we have every reason to think, because he is a liar, that he's lying about what's going to happen to them if they don't
100%.
do what they ask for him.
Yes. Yes.
And that's what's dreadfully frightening and terrifying about a story like this, which is when we all succumb to those inner demons and we all believe the worst of ourselves, there's nothing we can summon when the time comes to be able to say, you know what, I don't know that the worst is true. And the power of the story is it shows us what happens when we believe that the worst about ourselves is true.
Yeah.
To me.
So to prop up your point, there's text of the film after.
You're just gonna have to ram through at some point. Okay?
Yeah, just at some point, just raise your hand and be, you didn't like it, so you can take a bench. No,
soak it up, brother.
Just got benched, guys.
No, I'm totally kidding, of course. But there's the moment where, after what is revealed in that lottery scene, there's a moment of tension that is not societal, where Mike Anderson is standing up and he said, fine, you all can give up one of your kids. I'm taking my son and I'm leaving. And it is his wife who stands up and says, no, you're not. Our son is included in this. And so Mike Anderson is like, I'm excluding my son. I'm not subjecting my son to this. His wife says, oh, yes, you are. And that is the big reveal, that after the lottery scene, it is her son, their son, that gets taken, which is ruinous because Molly is the one who stopped her husband from protecting their son. And then that's the son that gets taken. Also, Mike, the only voice that said, don't do this, it is him who suffered for doing this. It is his son that is taken. And that is incredibly compelling on a number of fronts. But one of the things that really stands out to me about that whole thing is that as Linoge is leaving, she yells out to him and says, you tricked us. And he looks right back at her and says, perhaps you tricked yourselves. And that is, to Nathan's point about, my interpretation, and it is interpretive, my interpretation is that he does not have the power that he claims to have, that he had not one bit to do with Roanoke, that if they had stood together and collectively said no, they would have succeeded. My evidence for that is a very quick scene very early on in the piece when Kat and Billy, the two lovers who she is revealed to have had an abortion secretly, he at first tries to get Billy to kill her, and Billy doesn't do it. and Linoge calls him a coward for it, but he tries to get Billy to kill her and is unsuccessful. Then he tries to get Kat to kill Billy, and that is successful. So because nobody knew that the resistance succeeded at least once, nobody believed it was possible to resist, that it was a thing that could happen. And so then when Mike is like, we believe what's on our freaking door, we trust in God and in each other. Like, that's who we are and what we are all about. My response, man, there's so much energy around me. I realize my voice is rising and I'm really passionate. My issue about the whole plank thing, which I think, that's a really astute point. But I even get to the point to where that scripture, as I believe, was meant as an antidote to self-righteousness, as an antidote to say, like, no, don't you go around and act superior to everybody, and don't start acting like you're better than these people because you have planks in your own eye. Because that also the verse after it says, remove the plank from your eye, then call out their speck. It doesn't stop at just shut up about the speck. It says address the plank and then start doing it. In the same token, when the scriptures say you should not judge, it also then says, and this is the part it's rarely quoted. He says, but if you must judge righteously, for by the same measure you hold other people against, you will be held to. And what that verse is really communicating is recognize there's that passive thing that everybody talks about where it says, love the sinner, hate the sin. A more appropriate version that I've heard said that I do adopt is love the sinner, hate my sin. Like, my responsibility is to show love and to be so aware of my own need for redemption that I'm able to recognize it when I see it somewhere else. Like Mike Anderson says to, Molly, when she says, if it's a question of whatever, he says, I know what the question is. I'm not misunderstanding what the question is. And I also know that once you go down that road, every step gets easier. And that to me is one of the most compelling things about this. He's like, no. You resolve that question, and the mental gymnastics, one of probably the strongest pieces of scripting to me in this piece, is when they're deliberating about it, and they raise some really dang good points where they're like, if he kills all these children, how do we live with you?
Yeah.
That's what they throw back in Mike's face. Like, if he is able to do what he says he's able to do, how will we live with you? And they talk themselves into, this is what's horrific about it. They talk themselves into a ruinous, immoral, absolutely inviolable position simply because they are drenched in terror and shame.
Yes.
And they feel they have nowhere to stand. So they've lost their footing to stand up like Mike does and say, like, no, we can't. It's also strong acting, in my opinion, on Tim Daly's part, but he fights with every fiber of his being to say, like, no, please, God, do not do this. This is a bridge too far. And they all so easily just give over to it. And one of the most haunting things, before I shut up and let somebody else talk, is one of the most haunting things is the moments in there where before Robbie's wife starts to draw it, she says, I can't, Robbie, I've never been lucky. Like, I can't do it. I can't do this. And then that one woman, I forget whose wife she was, that one woman, before she's about to reveal the stone, says, I thought I could do this, but I can't. Like, they didn't do the work. They didn't consider the question. They didn't recognize, like, no, we are offering up one of our own. Because let me tell you, there's a scripture that I knew, I jotted down for the sake of this, but I'll express it, and then as a principal thing. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 14 through 18, it says, but even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. And this is the key verse. It says, for it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil.
Mm-hmm.
It is better to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. And that's something that is directly sort of called to us to say, look, we're not saying there's not a cost to it. As Mike posits in the beginning and end of the film, in life you pay as you go. There's a cost to this, okay? And he suffers tremendously for doing good, but he suffers for doing good rather than for joining with everybody else and saying, oh no, like we're just going to yield over to it. And if you're going to suffer because you fought for the good thing instead of because you just bowed down to the bad thing. Anyway, I think
well, and to put it, no, Blake, hang on. I'm coming to you. But Reed, what you've just said in layman's terms is even if Lenoge was right, you still make the choice to say no. Absolutely. Even if it resulted in him taking everything. The right and good capital G thing was to say no. Andy, I'm addressing something that's been lingering with me. You kept referencing different demographics and I'm using this phrase you didn't, flavor of the year type of racial terror being performed against them. And this manifests in the film as well. The specificity of a thing that is universal, right? It's well, it was immigration and African Americans whom have never gotten out from under the thumb of white supremacy. It's now Asian Americans because idiot, conspiracy theorists who blame COVID explicitly on them. And the problem isn't that it keeps changing. The problem is we never dealt with it to begin with. And you've got Lenoge in this metaphor, the centerpiece of problem that we keep trying to gloss over and glance over and pass by and absolve and sort of pretend isn't there while he keeps stirring up the individual shame. Blake, to you, I love you guys. A question.
But I didn't say anything.
What?
Can I just say,
gosh.
I wasn't
trying so hard, Blake.
I wasn't trying to just say that the flavors were anything like
what
that.
made me. It's what I thought of as I pondered what you were saying.
Okay, I just want to say that I'm not
I got
done with everybody not feeling it. It's now a different flavor. It's all the flavors. I'm still involved.
Yes.
It was the spirit, not the letter. Absolutely.
Yes. Blake, say your thing. Blake, say your thing. Then I got a question for you.
So I think the thing going back to the plank verse, I think what has been said about that verse is really good, and I agree with all of it. I think the element that we can see Lenoge is using that against people is that the other aspect of that verse is that when you do call out evil, your witness will be marred. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. Like, that's a practical element of it. If people know that you've done something in your past, your witness in calling that evil out will be marred, but that does not mean that you don't go ahead and call it out anyways. Right. Because it's not up to you whether they believe or they are persuaded or they back you or whatever. Your job is to call out evil, period. Mm-hmm. Like that's, and so what Lenoge does is he says, no one's going to listen to you. Mm-hmm. Like, they're not going to listen to you because you're a pedophile, or because you're you beat up a homosexual, or you cheated on a test.
Right.
When you say those, one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah, exactly. But all sins are the same. So
I was speaking to a trusted professor of mine, and recently we go on walks about once a month, and she's an atheist, and she makes fun of me for jokingly for how I believe in God, and it's a back and forth, and she's starting to do some research into honesty, and one of the things that she was talking about is when we are in a group of people and they are all of a collective mindset, a collective hive. Say, for example, I think that vanilla ice cream is the best ice cream in the world. Reed thinks vanilla ice cream is the best ice cream in the world. There's no other ice cream better than vanilla ice cream. And so does Nathan. So we think that we've pushed that on there. The group hive has all put that together. But Blake likes chocolate. Now, does it open the door for Blake to say something to be and this is very simple. What we were talking about was very, very bigger than this, but I'm keeping it simple for the podcast. Sure. But does Blake opening up and say, instead of being silent and saying, yeah, vanilla's pretty great, or if he opens up and says, guys, I'm just gonna say you're wrong here. Chocolate is really good. Is it going to change the way that we think? Is it going to challenge the way that we think? Or are we going to close him off and push him from this hive that we have already? So when Mike comes out against taking the children,
right,
he's the one who stands out. Collectively, everyone is saying, let's give them up. We don't want to die. We know that the way that we are going to survive is if he takes one of our children. And Mike says, no, I'm not going to let it happen. He is taking that chocolate and saying, I know.
No, you're good.
But he is taking that chocolate and he is saying, no, there's something better. There's something different from there. But as we can see, this hive of people look at him and cast him out.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the risk that I think we take, even when it comes to the plank in our own eye and calling judgment out to other people, is if we are going to do that, are we prepared to no longer be a part of the hive, of the tribe, or are we prepared to maybe spur on? And Nathan says, you know what? Chocolate is pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So right. I don't know if that's a tangent, but like
it's basically 12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean,
I don't know what that is.
But you also saw it happen. And listeners, co-hosts, forgive me, but you also saw it happen. I'm going to identify a political reality and try to remove my commentary for it. But I'm going to try to remove my own personal feelings for it. But astute listeners will know how I feel about this.
I think you should put your feelings on it.
But please do, because I'm not a listener.
One of the things that recently happened, somebody for whom I gained tremendous respect, for whom I already had respect, but gained tremendous more, was the teacher Beth Moore, who was a strong evangelical voice. And she spoke up early on and said, hey, this whole, and I'm just identifying a political reality, hey, this whole evangelical embrace of President Donald Trump is a problem. And she would identify why these things are issues. And she was very promptly and pretty aggressively attacked, demeaned, undermined. She suffered a tremendous amount of backlash for that kind of thing. And it's exactly what you're talking about. You used the I think very simple and very effective example of vanilla and chocolate, but it's like there's a certain degree to where the hive mind demands loyalty. The hive mind demands conformity, and the hive mind says, like, no, you absolutely have to adopt this, and you have to and what happens in that, there is a difference between the idea of saying, like, hey, we have to bind together so that we can produce a collective good. And this was going to be one of my questions. And Nathan, I think you have a question burning that I can yield the floor to in just a second. But but this was one of my questions. Is one of our biggest lies the thing that they repeated at that town meeting more than anything else, which was, we have no choice? I don't see another alternative here.
Absolutely.
I don't see another alternative here. And that was one of the...
Yes. Yeah. I mean, God, love, lost. There's always a choice. Yeah. And man, I'm sorry, usual suspects, but the devil's greatest lie is that we do not have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
But you're feeding exactly into this, and I want what you just asked. I'm not neglecting it. It feeds this, and I'm going to go to Blake because I want to hear his thoughts, but it's for everybody. So when the group asks, or whoever individual that does it representing the group says, what choice do we have? Mike says we tell him no in one voice. And for a film that is, however much we respect the overall piece, it's a pretty oppressively hopeless piece. But that moment where Mike offers that alternative, that option, is shot through with what I would call holy hope. And I guess what I'm curious, not as podcast guest hosts, not as people trying to answer the right thing, but as freaking humans in the world, conducting ourselves. I mean, Blake, you've got a brand new baby. All of us are parents. Like, what does it look like? Why is it so hard? This is not a rhetorical question. I am asking for a response. Why is it so hard to rally others to a phrase I just coined? Yes, holy hopefulness. Why is it so hard to develop a solidarity towards that end?
So it's funny you asked that, because that was going to be one of my questions, but I think I don't really need to ask it because it's already been answered largely. Is that my biggest question was, what does it look like in that choice and that dilemma at the end of that film? What does it look like to choose the other or community focused choice and not the self-interested one? And I think, to answer your question, the biggest thing that gets in our way is self-interest or self-preservation. I think all those people were thinking, I don't want to die. And if he's right and we say no to him, we're all going to die.
Right.
And
if I can interject real quick,
Yeah,
I'm going to play the Lenoge advocate
Yeah.
here, because this is the stuff that plagues my daily comings and goings.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you just framed that, those people would say our choice is for the community good.
And see, I would say that, at least in a clearer minded. Now, if I was actually in that space, who knows? Like, but from my distance, I would say, no, it's self-preservation. I would actually say, from the perspective of watching that film, I would say that none of them, like, they do care about their kid, but they don't actually care about their kid beyond the care for their kid and their own life. Because, like, in my mind, why Mike's choice to go against the whole town is because he says the only way we can move forward as a community is if we say no and we all take the destruction. That is community-oriented choice. It is unity, even in the face of death. And so that's because all those people are thinking about their own family in that moment. They're not thinking about their neighbor. They're not thinking about, whose kid is going to get taken. They're thinking about their own, like, individual nuclear family. And also, they're trying to find their way to just say, we want to survive. So what do we need to do to survive? And so Mike is basically saying, first off, I don't actually believe that this guy actually can do what he says. And second off, if we're actually who we say we are, that we love our neighbor and we love God, then we say no.
Yeah, because Mike understands. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Blake, I love you. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you're good.
But Mike knows the profound truth that death is not the worst thing that can happen to you.
Yeah.
And that's something that all of us have a really difficult time stomaching. Is that reality when we have faced so much grievous loss, and when we're staring down, and like you said, I said recently on the pod, I can't remember which episode, but this phrase has rattled around to keep myself in check when I start talking bold and start feeling the weight of moral sort of ethics bearing down on me. I've said to myself, and I've said publicly, put my head in the lion's mouth and see how big I talk then. Like, I get it that I might be a shriveled piece of fear in the face of that too. But that is really what one of many things that Mike is pointing out is like the worst thing would not be for us to all be decimated. The worst thing would be for us to willingly give over one of our children to this monster. That would be the worst thing. And that's why the film has the denouement. It has the little epilogue, if you want to call it, that after they make their choice, that there's a reason why the final moment of the miniseries is not Lenoge leaving with the child and just leaving you with the gut punch, and that it shows you that none of them can sleep anymore, and that multiple ones of them eventually went on and committed suicide, and some of them just died, and maybe it was suicide, maybe it wasn't, but the ruination continues, and Mike is able, he even says, I left, he says, Molly got the house and she got this and she got the store. I got the car and peace of mind. And that's the thing, is because he walked away knowing, like, I fought it. I fought that good fight to the end. And he even said, Andy, you had brought this up. It would have been curious to see how this would have gone. Mike even begs Lenoge as Lenoge is flying away with his son, and he even begs him. He says, "Come back, come back, and I'll do what you want." And I guarantee you, in that moment, he would have offered up himself. Mm-hmm. I guarantee you, in that, and this supposition on my part, but I guarantee you, he would have been like, take me, like, don't take that, take me, because the only acceptable loss is our own. Like, that's the only one that we can really stand up with and say yes, because otherwise, I think we fear pain. And we fear death, and we fear suffering, and we will do anything we can to avoid that. And we will, and this is what's really compelling about the dilemma at the heart of Storm of the Century. So we will lie to ourselves and tell ourselves that we are doing a good thing. Like, the mental gymnastics to justify their choice is really fascinating to me. They are that woman who stands up and says, well, I mean, it sounds like an adoption, right? And they're gonna live a long life. Like, isn't that a good thing, But because here's the other thing that they've done, and this is maybe not stated explicitly in the film, but Lenoge has said it. He has said it. He has said, I'm dying. I am growing old and I am dying. And by your years, that'll maybe be 70, 80 years from now. But by my time, it's very short. I am dying. They have not just said, we are saving our town. They have continued. They've handed over the seed of evil for generations to come. Yep.
They've handed.
Yes, they've continued the cycle. Instead of saying, you know what, you can take us down. You can find somebody else to try to do your work because you're dying with us.
But if you think about the math of Mike Anderson's choice, though, is that it's I'm not going to say there's no cost, but he knows that if, that argument that the one person, I don't remember who it was, said, like, when this is all over, if we choose to go with you, how are we going to live with you? Mike is like, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Because if he's telling the truth, we're all gone. Mm-hmm. And if he's not telling the truth, he can't do anything.
He's powerless. Right.
He's powerless.
Well, and something that's jumping out to me that is the undercurrent of what you both are saying is the title is really yelling at me. The Storm of the Century. This choice is epoch defining for these people. And I would say, however big the metaphor is of the film, supernatural / demonic entity comes into a town and makes an ethical / moral dilemma and positions it to them, names their shames to barter their willingness to oblige his request. However big that metaphor is, we're living in pretty big times where the singular day-to-day choices of aligning or resisting the Lenoges of the world, I mean, as the movie kind of reductively does, he is legion. There are many of this representation out in the world, and man, y'all circled around this. There's a person I shouldn't even bother looking at their Facebook anymore. I can own that, and that's my own shame there. But it's a peer I keep wishing a better degree of solidarity with, and the only lesson I've learned is to not really engage, which I need to take it many steps further and just not even bother looking. But I'm a hopeful son of a bitch, and so it is what it is. But just recently, I went to this person's page, and yeah, that was stupid, and the level of venom. And I'll phrase it this way: there are people whom I think so. A terrible thing to say. I don't think enough of them as competent conversation partners that I would indulge bothering what they think. This is not really one of those people. I do think of them as a competent conversation partner when that time arises. But the level of venom they're spewing at the current political climate, and what I want to say, and what is so hard. Y'all remember, I don't know, within the last couple months, I made some comment on one of our shows about feeling my words taken from me. And this is one of those sort of ideas and I'm trying to express here. But what I want to say is, why are you so selfish? I know I've got problems. We all do. Lenoge can look at any one of us and say, this, oh my God, Nathan, this thing, and try to put me under his thumb. And so, yes, I'm not pretending otherwise, but the desire and the sense of like, why are you so selfish? It's Mike saying to them, that's essentially what he's saying. It's like, Blake, to your articulation of the distinction between community good and self-preservation, it's like, why are you being so selfish? Now, that's a huge question. And the crappy part, and it's bad, it sucks, is the compassion required to acknowledge you're under your own shame. And we need to figure out how to unhook that. Because that's like 50% of the equation here, is using someone's shame to manipulate them. Someone's shame or someone's negative sort of self-talk, whatever. These ways Legion in the world manipulates us towards negative ends by leveraging our shame.
And you know what, Nathan? That's why it's better to be curious. You need to ask questions. Ted Lasso that.
True.
Oh,
See?
Yes, God love that man.
He dropped Ted Lasso on you, and it just blindsided.
Sorry, I was just.
Yeah.
But
I was like, "What is Blake saying?"
here's the other thing. Here's the other thing that stands out to me about so much of the. God, this is hard. This is a hard thing to wrestle with, because I think about the character in the scriptures of Judas. And Judas is fascinating for a number of different ways. He is the great betrayer. Benedict Arnold can take a seat. Judas is the ultimate betrayer, right? And the reality of what happened to Judas is Judas, through whatever path, some people believe there was, spiritual manipulation that occurred to him. Some people believe it was just his own greed and his own self-interest. Whatever brought him to a place, it brought him to a place to where he was willing to turn over Jesus to people that he knew somewhere within, he knew they were going to kill him, or they were at least going to hurt him. And once he did that, he came to his senses, and there's a part of his story that is rarely ever talked about, in between his betrayal and his hanging himself, is when he tried to give the money back. And people don't talk as much about that moment in scriptures where Judas went back and begged for the people who paid him those 30 pieces of silver to take it back. And they refused to take it back. They said, no, we're not taking it back at this point. So he was left with nothing but what he was willing to trade lives for. And he was left with nothing but that value. There's an old Paul Simon lyric that talks about mistaking value for price, and talking about not in the context of that song, but just this concept of like, what is your choice worth? What value would you put on that? Not necessarily monetary,
Sure,
but spiritual, soul level. What
jumped out at me in you recounting Judas's story there is, we apply a patina to Jesus as he appears in the text that isn't unfair or unright, but take take Christian mythology away, don't make more of that word than I intend. Jesus was his friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
we would say, oh, Jesus the Christ, he was turned on by Judas. Remove that component. You're overplaying it. It's his friend.
Mm-hmm.
And the deep regret. Please take this back. Oh my God. What have I done?
What have I done?
That leads him to what?
Yeah.
Kill himself. Take his life.
Yeah. And he is the only human being. I don't have the stomach or the mind to know how to wrestle with this. But there is one individual about whom Jesus directly said it would have been better for him if he hadn't ever been born. And coming from the words of the Christ, that is heavy, heavy language, that it would have been better for him if he had never been born. And the thing that really that I struggle so much with is the ways in which it is, and we've expressed a similar thing on the show before, but if we do not learn how to make right, good, fair, okay.
Oh shit!
You know when Reed leans back, someone's about to get got.
We're a year in. We're a year in. We're Andy mentioned it earlier. We're recording on March 17th. So it is alarming and haunting when Facebook holds up memories of the language that certain people used a year ago, when this was all fresh and new, and it was not some big politicized volcanic thing, when it was just starting. And what is truly quite haunting about so much of that is the ways in which so many people, when we talked about sheltering in place, this is global pandemic language, when we talked about sheltering in place, when we talked about masking up, when we talked about that, so many people, I'm not going to name them here for obvious reasons, but so many people in the comments thread saying, yes, it's about love of neighbor. It's about binding together. It's that 1 year later, oh my God, the complete 180 turnaround that they have come to in terms of so much of their shifting opinions, shifting values, shifting everything. And it is alarming what 1 year of oppression, what 1 year of being in the middle of the fire, or at the very least in the frying pan, will do to us and do to our perspective, our moral standing. And what I was about to say when I suddenly leaned back, if we don't continually practice making the right decisions on the small choices, we will never have the stomach or the strength to make the big ones when the time comes.
We'll give our kids over.
We will hand over our future to end this torment. Give me what I want and I'll go away. Give me your future and I'll leave you alone. And if we don't, and that's our biggest issue, is I hear so many people say it in, like, I heard growing up in 80s and 90s church culture, people are like, would you have the strength? I'm sorry to be reductive. Forgive my language. Would you have the strength if somebody was pointing a gun to your head to say yes to Jesus and everything? And it's like, well, you know what? And when I look at my own life and when I think about these other things, I would love to believe I was Samson. I would love to believe that I was just this strong, mighty, moral, upstanding bastion in the faith. But if I'm not willing to interrogate and challenge the choices that I make on a day-to-day basis and make sure they are centered around right and good things, I will never have the stomach to live that kind of thing. I will, because when somebody knows my number, when somebody looks at me and is like, Reed, this is what you've done. You've been arrogant, you've lied, you've done this, you've done that. None of us, even the most righteous among us, has absolutely nothing, even if all we did was cheat on a test. You know, but here's one thing. Here's one thing that Mike Anderson knows about it. Sure, cheated on a test. But here's one thing that Mike Anderson knows about it, is he knows that a liar is going to lie, even when he's telling a fact. A liar is going to lie.
Wow. Tweet that. Andy, get to it. Tweet that.
Tweet it.
Yeah.
Tweet sooner than me.
But yeah, a liar is going to lie.
I'm just trying to include you.
Even when they're saying a fact, a liar is going to lie.
That. Oh my God, Reed Lackey.
Go ahead, Blake.
So I was just going to say this part of the film just came to my head, and there's a part, and I think it's like midway through, Linoge says to somebody that hell is repetition.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, speak about the cycles that they're continuing. I mean, like something that you often say, Nathan, is that hell is what is the earth we make. Like it's here. Like
A place
we
we
make
make, yeah.
hell. So
To be clear, I don't think hell is earth. That
I'm separating the
Yes,
spiritual.
yes.
I'm separating spiritual and the
Yes,
yes.
yes. Correct.
But like, isn't that like that's the whole nature of what we've been talking about? Is this is the sins of the father? It's the repetition of these choices.
And what's interesting about that, including that note here, which was the architecture of one of my other questions too, is if hell is repetition, what is Linoge doing? He's trying to repeat a cycle. So he has locked them into this hell.
Absolutely. Whoo! So obviously, this is a very challenging piece. It's brought up some incredibly passionate conversation. I want to give a brief moment. If any of us have anything that we would like to offer up, either a yes and of what's already been said, a challenge to what's already been said, or something a bit slight before we move into the closing fog meter and stuff like that. Is there anything that hasn't been verbalized that somebody really would like to bring up about it? If not, we can move on. But if so, I want to give a pocket for that right now.
I'd like to say one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm officially joining the hive mind. This is a great film.
Yay!
Just kidding.
We did it.
I was like, I don't know what's going on here.
No.
It was trickery.
A liar is still the liar, even when he says a fact.
Amen. No, I think this actually gave I knew that this film was going to give a lot of good thematic topics to kind of mull over. That was never my issue. It was other things. But no,
Sure.
I agree with the depth that we've jumped into. So
Awesome.
And how cool was it they mentioned Dolores Claiborne?
That is
was
awesome.
cool.
That is awesome. Yeah,
It's pretty cool.
Because she lives on, it's one of the few times, because a lot of stories take place in Derry or in Castle Rock or whatever, but Dolores Claiborne lived on Little Tall Island, and the events of that novel took place prior to the events of this, which is why
That's cool.
when Robbie Beals, I think is his last name, but when he talks about he says, whatever Dolores Claiborne did to her husband in the eclipse, that is the plot of Dolores Claiborne, which it's not a spoiler for him to reference it, but that whole subject is what that book is about.
That'd be very metatextual.
Yeah, that and Kat got her abortion in Derry.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, just anytime stuff like that's brought up and it's they say Derry or Castle Rock or anything like that, I'm just like, oh.
Yep. King landscape.
I do, in our attempts to swim back to the surface here, maybe a final question of some specifics. It's an already pretty heavy film, but as you scan your list, if you made one of kind of scares, creep factor, what would you identify as maybe your favorite being an odd word for things that are scary or creepy, but what would you pick off of your list of, man, this part, this piece, this component, this theme was really scary or troubling?
I had a lot of high hopes for my enjoyment of the whole miniseries from the first get-go. Whenever Linoge shows up and has the audacity to kill the old lady, I was like, whoa, okay, we're going there. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Starting big.
Starting big. So I was impressed with the darkness that it started out with. That he was willing to go there. So
yeah.
Andy, what would you pick as one of your favorite scares or creep factors of the film?
When the kid who can't play basketball runs into town and it's like, her eye fell out. She's sitting on the ground and her eye fell out. Like, it's pretty dark there.
Yeah, it's a dark piece. Reed, what's a scare on your list that you would point to?
So a scare that I would mention.
Please tell me it's the old lady.
Well, maybe because no. A scare that I would mention is, and it's actually, it follows one of the silliest like special effects things ever, like
the flying.
The kid's Superman flying through the thing.
Yeah,
That's
that's
one
rough.
of the silliest things ever. You know, in a film that has a lot of like creative and inventive sort of effect stuff, that's not among it. But when they're all taken in the snowstorm, and then one of them comes back, and the woman comes back, and she's got long white hair, and when she recounts the story of what happened and the terror she felt and everything, I remember feeling like even my heart racing a little bit when I was talking about like the kind of fear and dread that she was experiencing after what Linoge had put them through. And knowing, as I had seen it before, knowing what Linoge was going to take them to, it's kind of the closest I came to saying, man, if you had gone through an experience that pervasive,
Wow.
I would wonder if you would have the stomach to say, like, I don't know, y'all, he probably can do what he says he can do, you know? And so it's really chilling, that display of power that he gave to it. So her recounting her story of like when he took her and it looked like they were flying over, and then he just dropped that one of them, and then he was just gone and dead. So that was pretty chilling and haunting. One thing that I would mention, you didn't ask this, but one thing I would mention as a kind of a love, it's a little subtle, doesn't need to prompt any discussion, but I just love the fact that Mike Anderson, who it clearly has a religious background to it. His religious understanding is complex. He's savvy enough to put the blocks into like cryptogram form to recognize that Linoge is Legion, and out scripture quotes the Reverend twice. You know, like, so he clearly knows his scripture.
Bam.
But
And I really like his version of Job.
And I was going to say, but then he's got that really compelling, that's a pretty haunting thing where, you know, he talks about the part of Job they didn't write down, where he says, then Job later asked God, like, why me? What about it? And God says back to him, there's just something about you that pisses me off. And that the nature of like wrestling with that kind of understanding when you have clearly so much scripture rattling around in your brain, that's very compelling, and I love that aspect about it. So and you know, anyway, that's that.
No, I think that's great. I think for me, dang it, you'd said something that about the flying. Oh, what's her face, who does come back, does have a very Nadine quality about her from The Stand. Am I making that right?
Yeah.
I think for me, one of the most effective creep moments of the whole 4 hours, partly because I just didn't see the Trojan horse happening in front of me, was the utilization of the kids late in the film with the I'm a Little Teapot sequence, that whole culminating sequence of them touching the invisible cane and falling out, and the other little girl dropping the bad word to her mom, like that whole climax. I was like, dear girl, this is creepy.
Yeah,
it's creepy.
What was even more creepier is they said, "Oh, let's just leave him with the murderer. It'll be fine."
Oh, right, right. Tell him a bedtime story. You know?
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
Poor cat. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, that poor thing. Oh my gosh. So yeah, I want to thank everybody again. I've gotten a lot out of my system in this conversation, and I appreciate it very much. I appreciate having this space to be able to converse with friends about that, and hopefully the listeners enjoyed it as well, or at least got some meaty things for them to think about. So if you don't mind, we'll go to the fog meter, our very specific metric of fear and God, wherein all the material we rate kind of on their scares and on their substance. So I'm going to round table this up. You can give just a reminder to everyone. I'm going to ask about fear and about God, and you can give your rating from 0 to 10. Halves are an option for you, but you can give a rating from 0 to 10 on the fear measurement, and then we'll go around again on the God measurement. So, Andy, I'm going to start with you on the fear measurement. What would you give Stephen King's Storm of the Century from 0 to 10?
6.
Awesome. Blake, what would you give it?
4.
Okay. Nathan, how about you?
I don't know if I was just in the headspace for it, what it was putting down, but I was very caught up in its thrall, and I would say for the themes it's after, I would say a 7 for the fear factor.
I'm going to ramp it up even further, and it's almost entirely baked into the moral complexity in the ending of it. I'm going to give it a 9.5.
I mean, come on, don't do that. Don't do that, Reed. Give it a 9 or a 10. This is the ethical dilemma I'm putting before you.
Okay. All right.
Jumping out on the 9.5.
Okay. Well, then in that case, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 10 because
okay, do it. Good. I'm proud of you.
Yes,
Good.
because
in one voice.
Because I feel very much like that's not necessarily what's going to give you nightmares about this, if anything, is what would you do if you were faced with the same thing? Maybe not like the terror building up with like the kills and stuff like that, but faced with the same choice, would you have the stomach and the stamina to push back? And that scares me tremendously, honestly, because I feel like we are confronted with comparable notions in much smaller ways far more often than we'd love to admit. So I'm also going to go around in the same order for the God factor. Andy, what would you give it 0 to 10 on the God meter?
10.
Blake, how about you?
I'll go 10 too.
Nathan, how about you?
You don't have to be chocolate ice cream if you need to be.
Oh no. I really think that
ice cream, Nathan. You want chocolate ice cream?
I've said from minute one that the concept is good.
I will partner on the 10. Partly, I just didn't know where the story was going. So when it gets to what I want is one of your children, and that proving an actual dilemma for the people of the town, I was like, this sucks.
Yeah. No surprise. I mean, I gave it a 10 on the fear factor. I'm going to give it a 10 on the substance meter. The God.
But you gave it a 9.5, and peer pressure controlled you into a 10. But
no, thanks for reminding everybody about that.
You just got Leno's.
Boom, boom.
You
cheated on that test back at Gardner
Webb. Mike.
So that means that we collectively give Stephen King's Storm of the Century, I think probably an underseen film that I think definitely deserves some dusting off, an 8 out of 10 on the fog meter, which is a pretty impressive showing in that regard. But the perhaps harder question to answer, which I'll go around in the same circle, is would you recommend Storm of the Century for a viewing experience? Andy, what about you? Would you recommend it? Tough question.
Well, it's time permitting, yes.
Understood. It is over 4 hours long. Yeah, understood.
Yeah, it's not going to be the Snyder cut, so time permitting.
There's similar links though.
Yeah.
They are.
Yeah, but one has Superman.
That's true.
So Andy's answer is time permitting.
Spoiler
yes.
alert.
Blake, would you recommend it?
So time permitting, and with some caveats, yes, I would.
Understood. Nathan, what about you?
Yeah, I think if someone's a fan of Stephen King and doesn't want to read a 1,000-page book, which many of his these days are, I think it's about as distilled a version of his best hits as you're going to find on film.
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah, no. I think we've all said it about time permitting. Obviously, it's a 4+ hour viewing experience, and is liable to punch you in the gut a little bit. I was concerned in a number of ways about recommending it because of some of the oppressive nature of the way like Lenoge haunts them and even compels some people to take their own life. It's kind of, it's worth like putting an asterisk on how that can be an oppressive sort of subject for people. So with that caution, I do recommend it. I think the moral dilemma at its heart and the way it handles, I think, just for me, if I were to rank like moments in Stephen King's piece, making a top 10 might be Mike Anderson's plea to them to not do this. That sequence is, I think, some of King's strongest character confrontation in any of his works, and I really respond very strongly.
And if it proves just too heavy, a great palate cleanser is Ted Lasso. So
yeah. absolutely. So there you have it for Stephen King's Storm of the Century and this next installment of Quarterly King. Thank you very, very much to Blake and Andy for being here with us as a guest spot on this episode. Thank you, as always, to Nathan for joining in this conversation with us. So next week, we are going to be pivoting back into our ongoing series of hashtag What Scares Us with a listener curated piece that, frankly, we probably took way too long to get to because it's a bit popular in the horror world. We are going to be going to Tom Holland's 1988 film, Child's Play. We're going after Chucky next week. So
Or he's coming after us.
Or he's coming after us. Something's happening. So, so by all means, acquaint yourself if you're not already familiar with it. Do be aware we are going with the Tom Holland original, not the 2019 remake. So the original Child's Play. Acquaint yourself with that, and we will see you there next week. As we say on every episode, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it is not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. Thank you again, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thank you, listeners. We'll see you next week.
Yeah.
See ya.